Do you remember the familiar soaring melody of the violin and the rough, mud-stained bare feet of the children on the 70s television screen? The monumental hit, Little House on the Prairie, once swept across the small screen, becoming the gold standard for American family values, a place where good always triumphed and every mistake was forgiven. Ironically, behind the lens lay a chilling reality. A curse seemed to have struck the town of Walnut Grove directly. The childhood icons of that era were suffocated by toxic asbestos dust from their very own sets, collapsed from immunodeficiency syndrome at age 34, or lost their entire fortunes under massive liens from the IRS. Let's unseal the secrets behind the perfect smiles of these characters. Number 1. Shannon Doherty. Jenny Wilder. Shannon Maria Doherty was born on April 12, 1971, in Memphis, Tennessee. She entered Walnut Grove when she was just 11 years old, precisely when Little House on the Prairie needed a young face to sustain the spirit of the Ingalls family in its final seasons. Through the role of Jenny Wilder, producers viewed her as the next generation of America's most famous prairie town. Gen X audiences remember her for her bright, mischievous eyes, short brown hair, and simple floral dresses as she ran through the fields under the golden California sun. Jenny Wilder wasn't just a new character for many American families in the early 80s. She was a reminder that Walnut Grove still had life even after familiar faces began to depart. But Hollywood has never allowed the image of the Prairie Girl to survive for long. Entering the 90s, Shannon Doherty exploded globally with Beverly Hills 90210 and continued to shake American television through Charmed. Her fame multiplied exponentially, and so did the scandals. A string of brief marriages splashed across the tabloids. Paparazzi stalked her from nightclubs all the way to parking lots. Rumors of backstage conflicts, screaming matches with co-stars, and a volatile work attitude turned her into a perpetual tabloid target for years. From the gentle girl of Walnut Grove, Shannon was gradually framed by the media as Hollywood's rebel star. And in Hollywood, a title like that usually outlasts your career. The true tragedy began in 2015. Shannon Doherty was diagnosed with breast cancer. Prolonged rounds of chemotherapy rapidly and completely altered her body. Her hair vanished, her weight plummeted. Televised interviews gradually gave way to constant visits to cancer treatment centers. Then, the disease metastasized, from her breast to her brain, from her brain to her bones. In numerous public videos near the end of her life, audiences watched her try to keep her voice steady as she described nights filled with relentless pain and the creeping terror that her body was no longer responding to the treatments. The woman who once stood under the flashing red lights of Hollywood now spent most of her time under the cold, white lights of hospital wards. Audiences had once watched Jenny Wilder run across sun-drenched fields. Now, they watched Shannon Doherty, head covered by a scarf, walking slowly down oncology corridors with a medical team trailing behind her. July 13, 2024. After nearly 9 years battling metastatic cancer, Shannon Doherty passed away at the age of 53. Her body finally stopped responding to the treatment protocols. Her death concluded one of the most publicly chronicled medical battles in modern American television history. To many viewers, that moment felt like the final time a piece of their childhood memories vanished from the screen. At the time of her passing, Shannon Doherty's net worth was estimated at around $5 million. A substantial portion of that fortune had been eroded by years of medical treatments, surgeries, and prolonged care. The woman who once blanketed American television ultimately had to spend nearly a decade fighting her own body. But at least, Shannon still had the chance to say goodbye to her audience before departing. Some other veterans of Walnut Grove didn't even have that luxury. They collapsed so fast that the television shooting schedule practically became a death warrant signed years in advance. Number 2. Victor French Isaiah Edwards. Victor Edwin French was born on December 4, 1934 in Santa Barbara, California. In Little House on the Prairie, he played Isaiah Edwards, a rugged, bearded, drinking, booming-voiced man who always showed up just in time to pull someone back from despair. Amidst the harsh winters, plagues, and relentless losses of Walnut Grove, Isaiah Edwards was like a fire that kept the show from drowning entirely in gloom. 70s American audiences remember him for his booming laughter, faded shirts, and moments patting Michael Landon on the back in the dusty fields. He didn't have a classic Hollywood face, but he was the kind of person who made the audience feel that the town of Walnut Grove truly existed. That incredibly successful role gradually mutated into a cage that locked Victor French's career in. After leaving Little House on the Prairie, he found it nearly impossible to escape the shadow of Isaiah Edwards. Producers consistently rejected him for new roles because audiences were too accustomed to his Western farmer persona. In Hollywood's eyes, Victor French was no longer a versatile actor. He was just Isaiah Edwards in a different costume. When major film offers disappeared, French retreated to working almost exclusively on projects run by Michael Landon, particularly Highway to Heaven. From a beloved face on national television, he was trapped in a professional loop with virtually no way out. In Hollywood, being remembered too well by the audience is sometimes just as dangerous as being forgotten. In his final years, Victor French's body began to pay the price for decades of non-stop working and smoking on set. The television shooting schedules of the 70s and 80s were notoriously brutal. Crews often worked outdoors for hours under the bone-dry heat of Simi Valley, California, during the brief breaks in trailers reeking of makeup and sweat. French almost always had a cigarette in his hand. Smoking became a decades-long habit. Then it became a death sentence. In early 1989, a persistent cough began shifting into severe chest pains. Medical tests confirmed he had end-stage lung cancer. The disease progressed so aggressively it gave his body almost no time to react. Audiences had once seen Isaiah Edwards roaring with laughter in a dusty Walnut Grove tavern. Now, Victor French had to breathe through an oxygen mask in a hospital room just months after his diagnosis. June 15, 1989, merely months after discovering the lung cancer, Victor French passed away at the age of 54. His body collapsed at a speed far too terrifying for any treatments to take effect. The man who had brought the biggest laughs to Walnut Grove ultimately departed, surrounded by the hum of ventilators and medical equipment. Many of his contemporaries were just beginning to enter retirement. Victor French never got that chance. His remains were cremated, and his ashes returned to his family in a highly private funeral. At the time of his passing, his net worth was estimated at around $1 million, quite small, considering the immense impact the character of Isaiah Edwards had made on American television over the years. The coldest part doesn't lie in that number. It lies in the fact that one of the faces that brought the most warmth to Walnut Grove was ultimately dragged down to an early grave by the very disease intrinsically tied to the smoking culture of old Hollywood. But even lung cancer was not the most terrifying thing to haunt the sets of Little House on the Prairie. For other actors, the danger didn't come from cigarettes. It came from invisible toxins sprayed directly onto the sets for years under the guise of safe effects. Number 3. Merlin Olsen, Jonathan Garvey. Merlin J. Olsen was born on September 15, 1940, in Logan, Utah. Before setting foot in Walnut Grove, he was already an NFL legend, a pillar of the notorious fearsome foursome defensive line for the Los Angeles Rams. When he donned the work clothes of Jonathan Garvey, Olsen brought a very different kind of masculinity to American television. Not flashy, not the polished Hollywood hero type, just a giant of a man with shoulders like a brick wall, a deep, warm voice, and a gaze that always made the person opposite him feel safe. Gen X audiences saw in Garvey the ideal father and neighbor they believed could withstand any storm the Prairie threw at them. That image quickly became one of the most memorable symbols of masculinity in the history of 70s American television. But that seemingly invincible body never truly escaped erosion. After leaving the NFL and gradually stepping back from the television spotlight, Olson retreated to a quieter life. He believed he had already survived the most brutal, collision-filled years of sports and filming. Then, abnormal signs began to appear: prolonged chest pains, shortness of breath, exhaustion that wouldn't fade even with rest. His medical files subsequently unsealed a much colder truth: the very work environment of his past might have been silently destroying his body from the inside out. In 2009, Merlin Olson was diagnosed with mesothelioma, a rare and extraordinarily dangerous cancer that attacks the lining of the lungs, typically linked directly to asbestos exposure. The ensuing investigation triggered a massive wave of lawsuits aimed at industrial materials companies. For decades, asbestos had been ubiquitous across old film sets and construction sites, insulation in the ceilings, set building materials, dust floating in the enclosed air of sound stages. Those nearly invisible particles silently accumulated in his lungs for years before detonating into a death sentence. Audiences had once viewed Jonathan Garvey as a man who could rebuild an entire house with his bare hands after a blizzard. But inside Merlin Olson's chest, every single breath was now becoming a genuine battle. The disease advanced with ruthless speed. His damaged lungs meant the massive body that once dominated football fields now had to rely on an oxygen support system just to keep breathing. The man who had appeared as a living fortress on screen gradually withered away on a hospital bed. March 11, 2010. Merlin Olson passed away at the age of 69 in Duarte, California, after battling mesothelioma. He was buried at San Gabriel Cemetery in California at the time of his passing. Merlin Olson's net worth was estimated at around $15 million, but in his final years, a significant portion of that money was consumed by legal battles over asbestos exposure and prolonged medical treatments. What makes his file so chilling does not lie in his net worth. It lies in the fact that the man who epitomized strength and endurance was ultimately brought down by specks of dust no one could see while the cameras were rolling. But if Merlin Olson was destroyed by toxic, invisible dust on set. The most terrifying backstage ghost of Little House on the Prairie originated from within the walls of a seemingly normal home. Not a disease, not an accident, but a secret carrying the hue of a criminal file, buried deep for years. Number 4. Allison Arngrim Nellie Olson. Allison Margaret Arngrim was born on January 18, 1962, in New York City. From her very first appearance in Walnut Grove, she became the collective nightmare of every American child in the 70s. With her stiff, porcelain doll blonde curls, a perpetually condescending smirk, and a shrill, biting voice, Nellie Olson quickly became one of the most iconic television villains in American screen history. Audiences didn't just dislike Nellie, they felt genuine rage whenever she appeared. Parents used the name Nellie Olson as a label for spoiled, selfish children, and that very level of collective hatred became the clearest proof of Arngrim's acting brilliance. The girl delivered the exact toxic conflict required to highlight the kindness of the Ingalls family. But becoming the most hated child in America came with a twisted price. Audiences began blurring the character with reality. Allison was insulted on the streets, isolated by other children, and sometimes even had things thrown at her by people who truly believed she was Nellie in real life. However, the public's hatred wasn't the most terrifying part. When the cameras turned off, the girl who played the bully on television was, in reality, trapped in an environment of absolute terror inside her very own home. Audiences saw a venomous rich girl mocking others on screen. No one saw the panicked child hiding beneath the blonde hair and elaborate lace dresses. In 2010, Allison Arngrim released her memoir, Confessions of a Prairie Bitch, completely shattering the Prairie childhood illusion the public had believed in for decades. In the book, she revealed that she had endured prolonged abuse as a child. The person she accused was her own biological brother, who lived in the same house. What makes the story even more chilling lies in the next detail. She stated that the adults around her knew something was wrong. Yet the silence continued. Throughout that entire period, Arngrim still had to show up on set, right on time, put on makeup, wear the dresses, smile for the cameras, and continue playing the girl who specialized in hurting others, all while she was decaying from the inside out. That was the cruel paradox of Hollywood in that era. A child could break down crying in real life, and minutes later had to step back into the lights and keep acting as if nothing had happened. Alison Arngrim's script did not end in a grave or a silent disappearance like many of her co-stars. She chose to fight back. Instead of burying the past, Arngrim went public with everything, turning her childhood trauma into the foundation for her later social activism. The former child star joined campaigns raising awareness about child abuse, worked with numerous victim protection organizations, and consistently appeared in programs advocating for legal reform. The greatest paradox of Little House on the Prairie perhaps lies right here. The woman despised by all of America on screen became one of the rare few brave enough to stand up and tell the truth about what happened behind the scenes of that era. Alison Arngrim's net worth is currently estimated at around $400,000, a minuscule figure compared to the cultural value the character of Nellie Oleson generated for American television through decades of reruns. But her file was never truly about money. What makes this story so haunting is that one of the faces that brought the most laughter and emotion to American childhoods spent the majority of her adolescence in absolute terror. And almost no one noticed. And the most terrifying part is she wasn't the only one in Walnut Grove living behind a mask like that. Number 5. Catherine McGregor Harriet Oleson. Dorlee Dean McGregor was born on January 12, 1925 in Glendale, California. All of 1970s, America used to grit their teeth whenever Harriet Oleson appeared on screen. With her stiff, towering bun, glaring eyes, and a shrill, condescending voice. Catherine McGregor turned the Walnut Grove mercantile owner into one of the most famously despised characters in American television history. Audiences hated Harriet, but they couldn't take their eyes off her. Every time Harriet entered the frame, the air instantly tensed. Her venomous jabs, ridiculous boasting, and arrogant attitude became the spice that helped Little House on the Prairie sustain its massive appeal for years. Harriet Oleson was not the gentle soul of Walnut Grove. She was the source of conflict that kept the town alive. But Catherine McGregor's greatest success also locked her entire career in a cage. Casting directors no longer saw an actress, they only saw Harriet Oleson. After the series ended, audition invitations thinned out and then virtually vanished completely. Hollywood had no idea what to do with a woman who had played a villain so convincingly for almost a decade. In real life, McGregor was also known for being outspoken and almost never tried to please the studio system. She refused to play the Hollywood social game. Hollywood responded with silence. No major scandals, no sensational controversies. Catherine McGregor's disappearance was almost absolute, and the terror lay precisely in that silence. In her final years, she withdrew from the entertainment world, embraced Hindu spirituality, and lived a reclusive life in California. The woman who once appeared every week in front of tens of millions of viewers practically vanished entirely from pop culture. No retrospective talk shows. No memoir deals, no grandiose, nostalgic Hollywood comebacks. The audiences who grew up with Harriet Oleson gradually aged, while Catherine McGregor lived quietly behind the closed doors of her twilight years. November 13, 2018. Catherine McGregor passed away at a care facility belonging to the Motion Picture and Television Fund in Woodland Hills, California. She was 93. There was no massive media wave, no long lines of former colleagues blanketing her funeral. The woman who once had all of America arguing for years left the world in almost total silence. Her body was cremated according to her personal wishes at the time of her passing. Catherine McGregor's net worth was estimated at under $500,000, a chillingly small number when placed next to the cultural impact Harriet Olsen once created on American television. The most terrifying part doesn't lie in the collapse. It lies in how a face that had appeared in nearly every American living room eventually vanished from public memory so slowly that no one even realized when it began. And for the very heart and soul of Walnut Grove, the price paid for childhood fame was far more brutal. Number 6. Melissa Gilbert Laura Ingalls. Melissa Ellen Gilbert was born on May 8, 1964 in Los Angeles, California, with her twin braids and eyes that always gleamed with intelligent stubbornness. Laura Ingalls quickly became the heart of the entire Little House on the Prairie series. Audiences didn't just watch her grow up on screen, they grew up with her. The image of Laura running through grassy fields beneath the sunset became one of the most enduring American television symbols of the 20th century. For years, Melissa Gilbert was the central face that kept the entire ratings machine running. The little girl of Walnut Grove wasn't just a child actor, she was the biggest brand of the entire series. But when childhood ended, the shadow of Laura Ingalls began to strangle the rest of Melissa Gilbert's life. Entering adulthood, she constantly struggled to escape the mold of the good prairie girl that America had nailed onto her since she was a young girl. While her career stalled, her personal life also began to fracture. Failed marriages led to financial disputes and disastrous investment decisions. The perfect family image on screen increasingly contrasted with the highly unstable reality of her real life. Years of continuous labor since childhood began taking a direct physical toll on her body. Melissa Gilbert had to undergo numerous surgeries on her spine and neck after enduring years of physical pressure on film sets since she was a child. The horseback riding, the falls, and the grueling shooting schedules of 70s television left lingering consequences decades later. Then in 2015, her financial files collapsed publicly. The IRS announced she owed over $360,000 in back taxes. The childhood icon of millions of American families was now in the tabloids over unpaid bills. Melissa Gilbert is still alive, but her current life is almost the exact opposite of the halo that once covered Walnut Grove. Moving far away from California, she relocated to rural New York to live a much quieter life with her husband. The woman who was once at the epicenter of American television now spends most of her time gardening, raising poultry, and battling chronic back pain that persists with age. No more Hollywood red carpets, no more massive film sets. Only a former child star trying to keep her life as peaceful as possible after decades of being consumed by premature fame. Melissa Gilbert's net worth is currently estimated at around $500,000, a shocking figure when placed next to the massive impact Little House on the Prairie once generated on American television. What makes her story so chilling isn't that amount of money. It's the fact that the little girl who once embodied the American family dream ultimately had to spend most of her adult life desperately trying to escape the very image that made her a legend. And the man who created that image was also hiding a body that was being destroyed faster than anyone could realize. Number 7. Michael Landon Charles Ingalls. Eugene Morris Orwitz was born on October 31, 1936 in Queens, New York. When he stepped into the role of Charles Ingalls at age 38, Michael Landon didn't just star in Little House on the Prairie. He became the father figure for all of America. His signature curly hair, calm voice, and eyes always filled with forgiveness turned Charles Ingalls into the moral compass of American television for years, to millions of Gen X families. He was the man who always showed up just in time to fix the roof after a storm, pull the family through winter, and hold his daughters in his arms before the episode closed. Michael Landon wasn't just the star of the series. He was Walnut Grove. But the image of the perfect father on screen came with a pressure almost impossible to maintain in real life. While Charles Ingalls continuously preached family values on national television, Landon's own marriage began to severely fracture behind the scenes. Messy divorces, public disputes, and the crushing pressure to maintain his image gradually turned his personal life into a war of constant attrition. Audiences saw an ideal father. Meanwhile, Michael Landon became increasingly trapped inside that very persona. The workload Landon carried on his shoulders far exceeded that of a normal television actor. He starred, wrote scripts, directed, and supervised production for a massive number of episodes each season. The grueling, endless workdays pushed him into heavy smoking and intense drinking habits. The cigarette smoke almost never left the set. Many colleagues later recalled that Landon could chain smoke multiple packs a day right in the middle of directing the child actors. For years, his body continuously sent warning signals. He ignored them all. In April 1991, Michael Landon was diagnosed with end-stage pancreatic cancer. The collapse occurred at a terrifying speed. In just a few months, the man who once epitomized strength and stability on American television lost a massive amount of weight, his gaunt face appearing in his final public interviews. July 1st, 1991. Michael Landon passed away at the age of 54. Just 12 weeks prior, the vast majority of the American public had no idea the father of Walnut Grove was dying. Michael Landon was buried at Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery in California. At the time of his passing, his net worth was estimated at around $40 million, a colossal fortune for television at the time. But pancreatic cancer does not care about ratings, fame, or Hollywood paychecks. It took exactly a few months to drag the most powerful man in Walnut Grove down to his grave. And the longest-kept secret of that town belonged to a face that appeared very late in the series. Number 8, Steve Tracy Percival Dalton. Stephen Tracy was born on October 3, 1952 in Canton, Ohio. Appearing late in the series as Percival Dalton, the only man patient enough to tame Nellie Oleson, Tracy quickly became a surprise highlight of the final seasons. His scholarly appearance, polite demeanor, and natural chemistry with Allison Arngrim made him especially beloved by audiences. Percival brought a rare sense of stability amidst a Walnut Grove that was slowly approaching its end. To many viewers at the time, Steve Tracy was the face of the series' future after the Ingalls generation. But off-screen, Tracy was living in an era where Hollywood practically did not allow people like him to exist publicly. In the 1980s, deep-seated prejudices regarding sexual orientation cast a heavy shadow over the American entertainment industry. Tracy was forced to keep his personal life deeply hidden to protect a career that was just beginning to bloom. One ill-timed rumor could terminate all contracts. A single photo outside a nightclub could destroy an entire acting future. He lived in Hollywood, but almost constantly had to remain on guard against the very world surrounding him. Then, the disease arrived. Steve Tracy contracted HIV during a period when AIDS was still shrouded in extreme terror and extreme stigma across the entire United States. At that time, effective treatment protocols virtually did not exist. His body began to collapse rapidly. His immune system was systematically destroyed, triggering a cascade of deadly opportunistic infections. The youthful man who once stood beside Nellie Oleson on screen slowly faded away during months of isolated treatment. Many people around him didn't even know exactly what disease he was suffering from. November 4, 1986. Steve Tracy passed away in Florida at the age of 34 from AIDS-related complications. He departed at an age when most Hollywood actors were just entering the peak of their careers. His death was swift, silent, and virtually ignored by major media outlets at the time. Steve Tracy's ashes were scattered into the ocean near Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park in California. At the time of his passing, his net worth was reported to be under $10,000, mostly wiped out by medical costs and his inability to work. What makes Steve Tracy's file so chilling isn't the poverty. It is the fact that a young actor who once represented the future of Walnut Grove ultimately had to die in silence, during a time when Hollywood was too terrified to even speak the name of the disease that killed him. Walnut Grove was once built as the safest place on American television, a town where every problem always ended with a family dinner, the glow of an oil lamp, and gentle moral lessons before the screen faded to black. But in real life, the people who created that world walked into vastly different wars. Pancreatic cancer took just 12 weeks to rip Michael Landon from the screen. Steve Tracy died in silence during an era when AIDS was shunned by all of Hollywood. Catherine McGregor vanished from pop culture so slowly that almost no one noticed when it happened. That was not the script of Walnut Grove. That is what truly happened to the people who once lived inside it. Which file haunts you the most, Michael Landon, Steve Tracy, or Catherine McGregor? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. Walnut Grove was once built as the safest place on American television, a town where every problem always ended with a family dinner, the glow of an oil lamp, and gentle moral lessons before the screen faded to black. But in real life, the people who created that world walked into vastly different wars. Pancreatic cancer took just 12 weeks to rip Michael Landon from the screen. Steve Tracy died in silence during an era when AIDS was shunned by all of Hollywood. Catherine McGregor vanished from pop culture so slowly that almost no one noticed when it happened. That was not the script of Walnut Grove. That is what truly happened to the people who once lived inside it. Which file haunts you the most, Michael Landon, Steve Tracy, or Catherine McGregor? Leave your thoughts in the comments section.